Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. So we've got Bharat here on the podcast. I'd like to welcome him to the podcast. I guess I'll let him introduce himself. What are you currently doing flying wise?
Hello, everybody. My name is Bharat Lakshmanan, and I'm currently a first officer on the Embraer 175 for a regional airline here in the U.S. I've been with the company for coming up on 2 years as of this upcoming April. Again, presently I'm a co-pilot here. I am eligible to upgrade to captain, so I have plans on hopefully placing a captain upgrade bid really soon here in hopefully the next 1 to 2 months.
Nice. Great. So I wanted to kind of just talk about like how you got into flying. Walk us through, when you started flying, why you chose to get into flying, and walk us through kind of that path into how you got to where you are today.
So how I got myself exposed to aviation, I was a very small kid when I first knew that I wanted to get into the aviation profession. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, my own father, he's not a pilot, but he's actually a professor in aerospace engineering over at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University down in Daytona Beach, Florida. It's also where I studied from. I graduated there in 2017 with a Bachelor of Science in Aeronautics degree. So when I was about 4 or 5, he would take me there over to the engineering labs. We have a bunch of jet engines that were donated by either airlines, corporate companies, military, private charter companies, where they would donate the jet engines for engineering students to use towards their classroom and their engineering studies. And so he periodically took me there to the labs and just seeing all those jet engines lined up and being able to see the students going hands-on, going into a very practical with all of their studies, and being able to see that firsthand was definitely a pretty cool experience from the get-go. And so as the time went on and I got older, when I was around 10 or 11 years old, my granduncle, he actually visited us from Indiana. He used to have his own airplane. It was a Cessna 182 Skylane. So he visited my whole family down in Florida for about a week, just under a week. So he flew his Cessna all the way down from Indiana with some stops along the way, of course. And during the time he was here, he actually took me up for a couple of flight lessons. He was an instrument rated private pilot with a CFI rating. And so he would take me up and we did some aerial maneuvers, let me get exposed to how an airplane flies. And then shortly after that, I got very interested in wanting to actually take some flight lessons, maybe go to flight school and really get to experience what it's like to become a pilot from the very first stages. And so my very first flight lesson, again, was around when I was 11 or 12 years old. I was extremely young. And then what ultimately made me say that I wanted to become a pilot for a living was in 2004. I went to go see family up in Arlington, Virginia, and not so far away from where my relatives live over there was the Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. There's a park just off the end of one of the runways. It's called Gravelly Point Park, and so I went there with my family and our relatives there, and I just lied down on the grass the entire day watching all the planes take off and make that sharp left turn over the river to avoid the prohibited airspace because of the White House. And so the whole day that I was over there watching the planes take off and land, that's ultimately what made me want to say I want to be up there. I want to be one of those people that's actually flying the airplane. And so eventually, up in 2013 is when I started university. I went to Embry-Riddle down in Daytona Beach, did a 4-year bachelor's degree in aeronautics, and also at the same time did my flight training over there from private pilot all the way up through my commercial multi-engine add-on certifications. And then after that, I did 2 jobs. I flew 2 flying jobs doing aerial mapping or aerial imagery to help build up my flight hours. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic caused a little bit of complications right there. So I was flying an aerial survey a little bit longer uh, than usual. And again, I flew 2 survey jobs because of the pandemic. And then eventually in 2022, I was sitting in class as a first officer at an airline. And up to this point, I've racked up over 1,000 hours in the jet. And as I mentioned, I'm at that point where I'm eligible to upgrade to captain. So it's definitely a strong possibility as far as moving forward and really progressing my career in this exciting airline industry. The industry. it's definitely growing. Just a lot of opportunities out there, so it's definitely a great time to be a pilot for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. We're at our school, we're just busting at the seams, busy, full of up and coming, students that really want to get into their career. You mentioned, your uncle that owned an aircraft, and had a little bit of influence on you. I've noticed a common denominator with us pilots that are we get to this at a certain point and we all look back. The common denominator seems to be at some point in our lineage in our life, we had this moment of discovery where we got the bug. And for for you it was that experience that really left a lasting impression. I remember for me, we took a field trip in first grade. I lived in closer to Los Angeles at the time. Now we live in Orange County. We took a field trip to LAX. It was 1986, I think, or something. And they actually took us in American Airlines MD-80. And these little first graders, as you can imagine, walking into this airplane. And I remember as a first grader walking into this MD-80, and I looked up and I saw all these switches, and I was just so taken back and in awe of the presence of this cockpit. I knew it was like something grander than me, and it just caught my attention. And ever since then, I was always like in love with aviation. So I see, I mean, I feel like we all have that little moment where we catch the bug, and it seems like we have all that in common and stuff. So that's is interesting that you had that influence as a younger kid like I did to kind of push you in this direction, or at least maybe not push you, but you were drawn to this direction. And then you mentioned something that I've actually been pondering in my head for a little while. You mentioned how you went to a park and you were watching airplanes. And recently, I did this experiment at my school where, we've got all these instructors and students around. It's probably about 20, 25 people in the lobby. In 1994, I was 14, ninth grade. A typical Friday night, I would go to like Barnes and Noble and grab every single aviation magazine that I could. And I'd spend 2 to 3 hours sitting in the magazine row because I couldn't afford to buy the magazine. I was a broke high school student, and I would just read every single page and learn about every airplane, about every airline. And there was this one magazine that talked about what airline was getting deliveries of what aircraft. It was pre-internet. And so, you know, I remember those times, and it was a true av geek moment, aviation geek, as they say. The hashtags now are av geek. And I remembered it, and I was sitting in my lobby looking at everyone, and I was like, I wonder, in comparison to that, to how it is now. And I said, hey, everyone, can I have your attention? I said, I got a question for all you guys. What what is what airplane has the longest range right now in existence? Like what commercial aircraft? And everyone was really kind of being timid and shy and scared to answer, which is typical. Um, a couple of the instructors took a stab at it, and then they're like 787. This I was like, and I did a face palm, and I was like, you guys don't go to Barnes and Noble on a Friday night and read magazines, do you? Because if you did, you'd know the answer to this. I mean, where's the Av Geeks at? It's different. It's different now. When I knew the answer back then, it was that 747 SP was the longest range aircraft. And I knew the answer. And then A340-300 took over. And then I had an obsession with that aircraft for a long time. And I looked around and I was like, I was teasing them and I was like, amateurs, you're all amateurs, right? Don't you guys are not true av geeks. You're getting into this for so I was teasing them and stuff. I just, I think back to your story of it resonated with me. You're like, I went to a park and I watched airplanes all day. And it's like the people who are getting into this because it's their passion, it doesn't feel like a job. I was in aviation when I made $19 an hour as a first officer in the Embraer 120 over 20 years ago. Broke, not made, didn't make a lot of money, but man, was I having the time of my life. I never thought about it because I love the job. And then now they're just throwing buckets of money at pilots because they're short on pilots. The money is icing on the cake. A lot of people, I see them getting into this because they see the money. And what are your thoughts about those people? Do you well, this job on social media looks like a beautiful uniform, you know, in a cockpit. It's got that Instagram photo. A lot of people don't talk about the hard work behind the scenes. Take a second, if you could, talk about the aspect of it that people don't really talk about, like sleeping on a couch for 2 to 3 hours in a crew lounge because you've got this long break and you need to catch up on sleep. And yeah, I mean, just what are the challenges of the job that people don't really talk about?
Yeah, so I would definitely say one of the challenges would be is especially if you're brand new to the industry, especially in the airlines or pretty much any jet job, really, even if it's in the corporate world, uh, but even more significantly at the airline level because it's everything is based on seniority. Seniority dictates your life at the airline. So the higher your seniority number is, the better uh, flexibility that you have with your schedules. So I think one of the biggest challenges, especially with me personally, was definitely the schedules. Especially when I first started, yeah, the first 3 or 4 months that I joined my airline, I was sitting reserve as a first officer. I was sitting on call in a hotel room, hoping that I would get a call saying that I have a trip assigned for me, whether it was a 2 day, a 3 day, 4 day, 5 day, or even just a single day trip. And I think the what really made it a challenge at the very beginning, and of course, as the time went on and I built up repetition, I got more used to it. Is one day you could be starting a trip at say 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and then you may finish around maybe noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then, but then the next day you may not see yourself starting until maybe the early or late afternoon. And so it's just the repetition of just having that typical routine, that cycle, where sometimes it can take a little bit of time for the body to for your body to get acclimated to it. Where one day it's saying you start early to late afternoon and then you finish late at night. And then say if you have maybe a 12 or 13 hour overnight, it's a pretty short overnight, and then you have to uh, go and fly again for about another 6, 7, 8 hours, depending on what the schedule is. So uh, I would definitely say schedules is probably the biggest hurdle right there. Uh, but again, like I said, seniority is the biggest thing, and as you build it up more and more, you get more flexibility as to what kind of schedules you want. Do you want to start early? Do you want to finish early, or do you want to start late and finish late? And be able to choose, what days you want to fly. You get to get all that flexibility right there. Uh, and then also, I think the another big challenge that I definitely faced was just the progression in order to actually get up to the airline level. Because, like you mentioned earlier, it's a highly rewarding job. I mean, I absolutely love it here. The airlines, it's a very exciting industry, and especially right now, it's such an exciting time with all the hiring that's going on. But I, I feel that, well, not feel, but it definitely takes a lot of work because, like I said, I started
Lot.
very first lesson I had was back in 2005, 2006, roughly. But it wasn't until 2013 that I went full on with the flight training and all my education, my college education. So it's definitely a lot of steps. It's a lot of time, money, sacrifices that
Yeah.
you have to make. And that as you progress along and you build up that time, the seniority, and as you make that career progression and you just build it up more and more, it's definitely going to reap its rewards. So it's definitely very challenging at the beginning. There were times that I said to myself, I don't know if this is right for me, or maybe this is not I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into because
Right.
flying be exciting. I love it. But then it was just the process of going through it where I thought to myself, oh man, this is so hard. This is so difficult. I just want to give up. But then that's where, even when I had those thoughts, whether I thought about it or if I verbally said it out, I'm just like, okay, let's slow down for a sec. Why am I doing this? I think back to the primary reason. Why am I here? Why am I going through all this? And it's ultimately because I want to fly jets for a living. I want to fly jets for the rest of my life. And I know that it's going to take a lot of hard work. It's definitely not an easy path. Um, and, you know, there's that old saying that nothing comes easy. It definitely takes a lot of hard work and sacrifice. And you have to be willing to be able to push through even during difficult times. As we mentioned, for you, you mentioned that you were at your company for a little bit longer than usual because of 9/11 and the fact that there just weren't any job opportunities. And in my case, with the COVID-19 pandemic, I wasn't able to get on with an airline for at least 2.5 years, roughly, until they really started uh, restart the hiring process. So, the best advice that that I can give to anybody, regardless what uh, branch that you decide to which route you decide to go towards in the industry, whether it's the airlines, commercial, corporate, military, is enjoy the process, enjoy what you have right in front of you. And you know, I personally, it's great to set goals. It's always great to have that ultimate goal of, oh, I want to fly a big jet. I want to fly international. I want to fly the long 16-hour flights. That's all great, but you want to focus on now, because if you keep on focusing towards the future and just forgetting about what you're doing right now, then it's just not. I firmly believe that uh, if you don't enjoy what you're doing right now, then it's
Living in the moment.
exactly. You want to live in the moment because you never know when you're going to get that opportunity again. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I personally like to say is, especially in the regional airlines, a great example is, since they fly smaller regional jets, they seat 50 to 75 people, roughly, give or take. We sometimes fly into some very unique places, like small island airports, for example, places with short runways, which you cannot do with a big airplane because they're just too heavy. They just don't have the performance to take off or land there. So, like I said, live the moment, because the type of flying that you'll get, whether it's at corporate, the regionals, or even the military, it's very diverse experience that eventually when you get to the majors and you start flying the big iron, it's definitely rewarding. It's a very fun career. And then when you look back at how you first started, when you first started that jet job, you'll think back to all those prior experiences, whether you flew as a first officer for a couple of years, upgraded to captain, went to small island airports, got all this unique experience. And it'll all of that experience will definitely build up to the time that when it comes time to get to that big airline that you ultimately want to retire from. It's definitely going to be all that hard work would have paid off. So the ultimate end goal at the very end, despite all the sacrifices and everything that the building blocks, as they would say, it's totally worth it at the very end. I'm super happy to have gotten this far in my career, and I got about 35 to 36 years to go before I retire, and I'm very excited for what the industry has in store for me up next.
Yeah, you guys are you guys are sitting in a really great position with that much career left ahead of you. That's a lot to look forward to, a lot of memories that you're going to enjoy. That's a lot of flying. I mean, I definitely have the itch to go back, someday to the airlines. And unfortunately, well, fortunately, I've got this keeping me here. It's I've got so much time and invested into this now, and I'm now married with a kid, and so it's a little bit tougher. But I'd love to someday go back, and I always like think about that. One thing you mentioned that resonates with me again: personal sacrifice. I don't think that people in general understand completely. In order to get to somewhere you want to be, you need to put in personal sacrifice. And they hear it, but they don't know sometimes what it means. And I help define it for them as the owner of the school. And I often tell them stories about what I did, of what I had to do to get to where I was at. I got hired at a time in 2003 when there was tens of thousands of legacy airline pilots on furlough without jobs at every single airline. I had no time, no experience, CFI with 1,000 hours, and I got hired at a top-notch regional airline. And a lot of people say, "Well, you just got lucky." I go, "No, I put myself in the position to be lucky." And I was like, "Do you know what I mean by that? Let me explain." I didn't know anybody at the airlines. I didn't have the letter of recommendation. I didn't have that. So I thought to myself, how am I going to get my foot in the door? I know I'll apply I'll apply for a job at the airline in any capacity, and that will be the entry into the door. And from there, I'll figure out what I'll do next. At least I'll be someone from within the airline that now has access to all these people in the airline in some way, shape, or form, and my odds will be greater on the inside than on the outside. I remember all the flight instructors in my school were laughing at me when I got the job. They're like, because I applied to be a ramper and I threw cargo, I threw bags, I serviced labs of airplanes. I mean, you name it, I did all the grunt work while I flight instructed. They would laugh at me and say, "This guy wants to be a ramper. He's not one of us. He doesn't want to be a pilot." I think that that attitude and the entitlement of they had, it really backfired in their face because within 6 months of throwing cargo, I had met just about every single pilot that I needed to meet, and I had an interview inside of 6 months at the top regional airline in the country. What did I have to do? I had to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and drive to Palm Springs where I was based as a ramper and throw cargo all day in hot Brazilias in the summer in 120-degree heat. And every time I did it, I said hello to every pilot I could. I chatted everyone up I could. I networked. It's called networking. And by doing so, I didn't know if there was going to be a reward at the end of this. I hoped there was. And I thought, well, I'm getting paid to do it. At least I'm not losing money. You know, what's the worst that can happen? I meet some pilots, I meet some friends. 6 months later, I got called in for an interview. I show up to the interview at the headquarters at the corporate inner place. I walk in, and one of the pilots that I had befriended was standing there among the 24 other interview candidates, and he had this big smile on his face when he saw me. And I go, "What are you doing here?" He goes, "I'm the head of pilot recruiting." And he goes, "I can't interview you today because of the conflict of interest, but I hope you do well because we'd love to have you." And there were guys at that interview with furloughed from United that had 727 time. They were 777 FOs. Remember, this is 9/11. There were guys from American Eagle, who's and is now gone, that were at American Eagle for 10 years that were willing to give up 10 years of seniority to come to SkyWest. The industry was very different back then. And I walked in there, saw all this experience, and here I am, 23-year-old, 1,000-hour CFI, overwhelmed and intimidated. I just said, you know what? I'm just going to try my best. And if anything, I learned a lot of great information that next time I come back here, I'll do better. Went through the interview process that day. And at the time when you interviewed there, if you didn't make it past any phase of the interview, they'd send you home. Talk about awkward. You'd have to walk into the conference room, grab your stuff, walk out, and everyone would be in there watching you do it. And it was super awkward. Now they do interviews via Zoom. And So, personal sacrifice, the question is, how bad do you want to be where you want to be? And what personal sacrifice are you willing to do? While you're in flight training, are you going to delay your check ride for 6 months because you want to go out and have fun with your friends? You want to go on this vacation that you want to go on every single year. I mean, you name it. What things are you willing to just blow off and say, no, this is what my goal is, and I will not stop until I have my goal? That's the attitude I had. I'll, as the owner of a flight school, it's very hard to schedule check rides right now. There's a 3 to 6 month wait for check rides. Luckily, we have examiners that I have relationships with going back to when I was a 17-year-old student, and now they're examiners. And I have this relationship so I can get them to come in here. Whereas people who are strangers, they're like, sorry, 6 month wait, you're going to have to wait. Um, I tell guys, don't pass up these opportunities because they don't come around every day. The ones who are willing to put in the sacrifice, when they're here doing their research and they have these meet and greet appointments, the first thing I do, I don't tell them about all the great things. I also tell them about all the bad things. And I see this look of shock in their eye because they were expecting this sales pitch and they get something completely different. They get someone that's like, hey, dude, watch out for this. You're gonna have hard days. You're gonna have a bad day in your life, just in general. You're gonna have a fender bender. You're gonna have wake up with a headache. And then you got to come in for class, and you're gonna have a bad flight. Are you the type of individual that goes running off and runs away and never comes back because you had 1 or 2 bad days? Or are you that type of person that's like, tomorrow's another day. I'm gonna wake up, I'm gonna tackle my challenges, and I'm gonna move forward and overcome them. Because aviation has so many challenges. We got weather, we got maintenance, and it doesn't stop at the flight school level. This is just the first phase where you see it for the first time and you're not used to it. And so there's those people are like, this is weird, this is crazy. I'm just not cut out for this. You're gonna go into the airlines, you're gonna have scheduling issues, you're gonna have weather maintenance delays, all this stuff is gonna be there. And so, just to back up what you said about personal sacrifice, that's the best advice that you could give someone. It's like, don't look at this any different than you going to a professional school to become a lawyer, a doctor, or anything else. It's a long process. It's a long road ahead of you. You're making deposits into your future every day. Every day you make a deposit into the bank. The bank is your brain. It's the whole process. And then when you get to the profession, you're making the withdrawals every day, the fruits of your labor of that whole sacrifice. So I think you hit a good point on that. um I guess, the last thing I'll kind of ask you, and I know you're on a layover from a trip and you're probably tired, you've been up for oh dark 30. The last thing I'll ask you is, what advice do you have for people who are considering this, and also the ones who are actually here in their school? What advice do you have for them now that you have all of that in your rear view mirror and you're going, full steam ahead? What advice do you have for them that you would want yourself to be given if you could talk to yourself back in, your Embry Riddle days at the beginning?
That's a really good question. My biggest piece of advice is definitely enjoy the journey. If you're just getting started, if you just recently graduated from high school and you're looking for an aviation university, you're about to go to college and get your flight ratings, whether it's a university flight program or if you're doing it on the side, regardless what your path is, definitely enjoy it because life goes by very very quick. So definitely don't go uh, a day where you're not happy, if you will. It's as I mentioned earlier, it's a lot of hard work. It requires a lot of hard work, time, commitment. You're definitely going to experience bumps, some hurdles along the road, and they're all very great challenges because, as you mentioned, the industry, especially the airline industry, it's a very cyclical industry. One day it can be sprawling. Everything's going great, and then you'll definitely have your not so good times, as you mentioned earlier, with the pandemic, 9/11, and the economic recession in 2008. You'll definitely experience, but the most important thing is even when the industry goes through these big hiccups, don't give up because just because a bad event like any of the three that I mentioned took place, it's not going to happen forever.
You have a
So
failed check ride.
what's that?
I said one event could be you have a failed check ride.
Absolutely, and this is definitely a very common question that a lot of people ask me: is will check ride failures affect my progression to the airlines? And the answer is no. If you have like a couple of check ride failures, it's no big deal. Check ride failures are not the end of the world. They're not deal breakers. They're definitely not going to prevent you from getting hired at an airline, whether it's a regional or a major or a legacy carrier. And it's the same thing goes with corporate. If you want to fly Part 91 or Part 135, uh, check ride failures, if you have them, again, it's not the end of the world. You definitely have to mention it on your application, and then when they ask about it in your interviews, just be honest about it. That's the number one most important thing. I mean, honesty is the best policy, so don't ever lie about anything because they will find out,
Yeah.
whether it's or later on, like it could be days, weeks, you name it. But the point is they will find out, and the moment that they find out that you lied about something, then that's it. So just definitely
Yeah.
be honest, stay clean, be honest, and just
Yeah.
that when it comes to failures, all they want to know is when did it happen, what happened, and what did you learn from it, just to make sure that what happened that resulted in the failure doesn't get repeated in the future. And as long as you can do that, then you're good to go.
That
So
that's my conversation with my new hire instructors is you're gonna mess up. You're human. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. I mess up every day. The point is, we're not expecting you to be perfect. To be imperfect is to be human. What we do expect and what I expect, and it was formed because of the mentors that I had, be honest about your mistakes and tell me. Don't lie to me because I don't tolerate dishonesty, and it comes from, in being in aviation in general, you're expected to be of a higher standard where you're held to a higher standard because you have the trust of the public in your hands. The FAA literally says this in the FAR book. It says you're held to a higher standard. And so I tell instructors, if you screw up, just come talk to me, fess up. I don't care that you did it. I care that you're coming to tell me about it and then learn from it and don't do it again. Like that's not a green card, green light to like just screw up every day, all day and be like, my job's not at risk. It's just, you learn from it. It's part of the process. Be honest about it. I get prior record requests. My instructors are this is our 10th year of operations. We got guys at JetBlue, United, captains at United, captains at Delta. They're everywhere. I get prior requests when they get to their first regional job. I get the prior record request when they hit American Airlines. The prior record request, for those who don't know what that is, it's it's an act of Congress. Back in the day, somebody, a pilot was at an airline and was not their performance. I'm cleaning this up a little bit. Their performance was subpar and it was dangerous and risky. And so rather than stay at the airline and risk being fired, or they were fired, they were fired and they left. They went to a different airline because they had a bad experience and they couldn't do their job right and they were lying or they were dishonest. Another airline hired them and they didn't know the history of this pilot. And then the guy went out and flew and he had an accident and they killed everybody. And so when they dug into this guy's records, they go, wait a minute, he used to fly over here. and he had a failure in his training event, and he had all these problems. Why isn't there why isn't there a system to where we can follow these people and figure out who they are and what they're doing, because we got the public in our hands. So they have Congress enacted the Pilots Record Act, short for PRIA. And so operators like me, you as a pilot have to sign a document when you get hired at an airline that says you list every company you've worked for previously in terms of flying. You sign a document that says it gives the airline permission to pull your records from that previous company. And they ask, they're like, was he let go? Did he quit when he sensed he was about to be let go? What was it related to? Was it pilot performance? Did he fail a drug test? They want to know if this person's a bad person. So trust is a big thing in aviation. It's a small world, and um, all brought really, really good points. I really loved all these points you made because it really hit the nail on the head. It's like, man, you're about to get into an industry that could bring you so much happiness and joy and satisfaction of a job, but you could screw it all up if you're a bad character and you don't know how this industry works. Just be honest and stuff. So yeah, definitely definitely a good point. So awesome.
You know, I'd like to actually point out that just to add on to the honesty part is that, like you said, aviation is a very small world. There may be a lot of people in this profession, whether it's in the airlines, corporate, regardless what uh, branch or division of the aviation sector it may be. Like I said, people will find out right away, either right away or it may take some time, but they will find out eventually at some point. And so I personally know some friends who have gotten in big trouble with companies, or they've even gotten let go, and they just lost their careers or their livelihoods just because they were not honest. They were not honest, or they just something came up in their long background to where they made it up to the interview point. Just to take an example, only to find out that they found something in his or her record where it's either they did not disclose it, or if it was something too severe to where it was essentially like a high risk to where perhaps that company was may have felt uncomfortable with actually bringing them in, even though they may have been successful with everything beforehand. So the most important thing is, I mean, I cannot stress this enough: honesty, honesty, honesty. You just cannot lie in this industry. You just don't do that.
Right.
So sometimes a lot of people think sometimes the truth does hurt, and I will say it really does. I mean, sometimes people are very hesitant to, like for example, say if you have a myriad of check ride failures. Let's say if you have like maybe 3 or 4 failures, let's just say. Some may say, okay, that's a little bit excessive, but the most important thing is, and the way I personally like to say is that when it comes to failures, it's not necessarily the failure that we care about. It's more about your attitude towards it. Like, how did you fix yourself up to make sure that it didn't happen again? So we care more about what did you learn from it and your overall attitude, just to give an example. And as long as you have a positive attitude about whether it's that or just explaining anything, and just overall just enjoying the just the vibe here, that's ultimately what's going to help you get far as eventually landing that dream job of yours. And like you mentioned even earlier in this podcast, is networking. Networking is another big deal. When I first started my flight school career, when I first started at Riddle, we had this one club. It's part of a big union. It's called ALPA. So there was a club called the Alpha Ace Club. So we had a lot of airline pilots, whether they were legacy pilots, regional pilots, or even cargo pilots from, say, FedEx, where they would come over and talk to students about different subjects, or anything that the students were curious to know about what's going on in the industry. And back then, like I said, I was a brand spanking new freshman college student. I was very excited to talk to real life, line pilots at the airlines to try to get an idea of what the industry is like. And back then, when it comes to networking, I didn't think it was. I wouldn't say that I didn't think it was a huge deal, but again, since I was just getting started on it, I was just trying to build up the repetition. And as the years went by, I can tell you, prior to getting hired at my airline, the two survey jobs that I flew for example, those were not just from simply sending an application and a resume uh, through some online application, hoping that I would get a phone call or an email saying, hey, we'd like to interview you, that kind of thing. Those came from connections. The first survey company I flew for, I had a good friend of mine who I went to Riddle with, and he's also at the airlines as well. And he's ultimately the one who literally took my application, he took my resume and my cover letter and literally hand delivered it to the chief pilot and assistant chief pilot and even the general manager of that first survey company. And boom, the literally the next day, like 1 or 2 days after I gave him all of my documentation, I got a phone call from the chief pilot saying, "Hey, we'd like to interview you." And then, literally that very same day, I kid you not, that he called me saying, "We'd like to interview you." I drove up to do the interview. It was just a flight, like less than an hour. We just did aerial maneuvers, private pilot standard, that kind of thing. And then as I got down and parked the plane, he just put his hand out right in front of me and was just like, "Congratulations, you're hired." And it was the same thing that happened with the second survey company that came from networking as well. It's because I had a couple of close friends, some close coworkers from whether it was from my previous survey company where they knew somebody over at the second company, or if it was just something that I knew internally from my other employers. Networking really goes a long way. So whether you're just sending an application to them, or if you're very interested in working for that particular employer years down the road, once you have the hours and the certifications and all the appropriate qualifications that they're looking for, if you're able to shake their hands, get their business cards, their phone numbers, be able to socialize with them, maybe get a cup of coffee, something like that. If you can really show your face to them rather than just showing an application saying, "Okay, here are my qualifications," there's a difference between sending an application and just reading on paper, "Okay, this guy or gal is highly qualified, meets our expectations. Let's bring them in for an interview," as opposed to meeting them in person and really getting to know their personality, what they really have to bring to the table aside from what it has to say on, say, your resume or your cover letter or the overall job application. So, uh, biggest so another big recommendation, especially if you're already in the industry flying jets, whether it's at the airlines or corporate, or even if you're trying to get that first jet job, is go to all these big career fairs, whether they're college career fairs or the big networking events, where a lot of airlines and all these big commercial airliner and jet employers go to. Definitely go there, because that is the absolute best way to network and get contacts, so that eventually when you do apply to them, they'll come back and just be like, "Oh wow, I just met this person over at this particular conference event that took place over in, say, Orlando, like 2 weeks ago. Let's bring them in." So that'll basically move your application, your resume, and everything much higher up at the of the pile of people that they're trying to bring in for interviews, as opposed to, say, if you didn't go to the event, then it might be a little bit more difficult, because again, aviation, it's a highly competitive market, especially with the past year and a half, where everybody was hiring like crazy. But now things are starting to get a little bit more tight. They're starting to hunker down a little bit. It's all about who you know rather than what you know. So if you know the right people, aside from just simply having the qualifications, that's ultimately what's going to get you really, really far in this industry. So even when things get very difficult, when things start to hunker down, don't ever give up. I mean, that's the worst thing you can do, because again, when things get tough, it's not going to last forever. It could last for a few months, it could last for a year, a couple of years, anything. But at the end of the day, eventually that light at the end of the tunnel is going to become bright again, and that opportunity is going to be waiting for you on the other side. And at the very end, it's going to be a very rewarding career, very lucrative career. It's a multi-million-dollar career that you're going into. So a lot of perks with coming into this industry, especially if you're super young, trying to get started as early as possible. Definitely go for it, because again, especially at the airlines, seniority is a big deal. That dictates your life. It dictates everything about your profession up until you retire.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. These are all really good points, good advice. All right, Brock. Well, I really appreciate your time. Uh, it's been a fantastic interview and a lot of insightful information for these students. I bet you there's going to be somebody that's going to walk up to you in about a year or two and say, "Hey, I saw you on that podcast." So that'll be kind of funny. So, but I really appreciate your time for your advice and helping these people out, the students out, for helping them create this path and stuff. So really awesome. Hats off to you, and we look forward to maybe following up with you when either a you upgrade and or you move on to a major airline, either or. But let us know, keep us updated, and let us know how it goes.
Absolutely. Once again, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this podcast. It's a lot of fun to really be able to share my passion, my enthusiasm for all the aspiring students that are trying to get up to the same level as me. And honestly, just truly doing that. That even happens quite a lot in the airlines as well. Especially when I have, for example, when I have little kids visit me in the cockpit. That's ultimately what truly makes me
Yeah,
feel so good about what I love to do. I used to be that little kid that used to want to see the cockpit all the time, and now I'm on the other side of it, inspiring the next generation. And it's always to say that it's such a truly heartwarming, rewarding feeling just to be on the other side of everything that you used to be when you were young. It's the feeling is just truly indescribable. And so again, to all those aspiring flight students out there, best of luck to you. You're going to get up here. You're going to get to my level at some point, and it, just keep on doing what you're doing. And it's an exciting time, and it's definitely a great time to be a pilot for sure.
definitely, definitely. All right, bro. Thanks so much for your time. I'll stop the recording and then we'll chat a little bit after. So, yeah.